Welcome back to the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, Gettin Gritty Wit It with your host, Yariv Wolok, and my special guest this evening. Honestly, this is one of the most special episodes I've ever had. I like to tell people, Bill, that I grew up on the hockey school of Bill Meltzer. I've been reading your stuff since I was a kid, and it really, I would say, truly influenced my opinions on hockey and the way I see the game today. So thank you for joining. Thank you for joining the show. Thank you, Bill. Appreciate you coming on.
My pleasure, Yariv. Thank you very much. Appreciate the compliment, too.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I don't like this smudge too much, but it is. And I mean that honestly. I actually just had a podcast with Alexander Appleyard. We talked about you a little bit as well, just because you have a measured approach. And I always really appreciate that. Like Charlie O'Connor to me is very measured, even Russ Cohen. I mean, but the sensationalism on the internet today, I always find that to be very stable. So thoroughly appreciate the writing on that respect. So my question to you actually, and I want to talk about you just to open up just for a second here. And this is something I've thought about personally. To me, you're very knowledgeable, not just about the Flyers, but hockey overall. You've clearly watched a ton of hockey over the years, right? You've interacted with a ton of players. Why writing? And I'm just curious, like, why not scouting? Why not get involved in the game a different way? Why did you choose writing? I mean, I've benefited personally, so I'm happy you did. But I'm just curious as why you went that route.
Well, I figured out very early in life I wasn't going to play sports professionally. I tried, right? But that wasn't going to happen. I loved to write. Look, I enjoy researching. I like writing. I was a history major in college at Temple. And so I did some different things, always, working in the journalism writing field, putting those skills to use. And really the hockey part of it started out just a hobby. And then it grew into something that I was, able to do for a living over a very long period of time. But that's kind of how it evolved.
That's awesome. And I'm a Temple grad as well. And I can appreciate that for sure. And it just shows how weird life is. You go to school for history and you think you're going to study what you do for the rest of your life. And then now you're doing like kind of the history of the Flyers. So it's not that different actually, if you really think about it. Have you ever considered like scouting as a role? I mean, I think I'm no expert, but personally, I do think you have clearly an adept eye for the game and a deep understanding of it.
Yeah, there was actually, a few years ago, guy from International Scouting Services, Stu Siegel, who was actually also owner of the Florida Panthers for a while. And he asked, would I be interested in taking some of their scouting courses and whatnot. And I was pretty established at writing by that point. And you're, driving in your car here, there, and everywhere, to really not make very much money at all. Once, if I would have had an opportunity to do that younger in life, I would have. Yeah. But with the wife and with the wife and kids and stuff, I was established writing by that point, so I kind of stuck with it. But I consider myself, like a person. I mean, I do watch a lot of hockey, but I do always caution people that I am not a professional scout. I don't see as many games as they see, particularly because when you scout a game in person versus watching a stream, it's really a whole different experience because you can focus on one guy, shift in, shift out, every situation, every little detail, right? Otherwise, you're behind the eye of a camera that's following the puck around. So it's a different way to watch the game, and that it's good to an extent. But I think that I don't think I try to portray myself as a professional scout. I'm just a lay person who enjoys hockey,
All right. I love that answer actually. And I totally agree with you. And I had Craig Eagles on here. He's a scout for the Quebec Major Junior Hockey League. And we were talking about how you look for character, and a lot of that, it's like how the player responds to a play. You don't necessarily see that on camera, right? You'll see that off, how they respond on the bench, how they respond to their teammates, things like that. So I think that's an awesome answer. So let's get into hockey. Okay, so we actually have some good news finally. As we're recording this, the World Junior Championships are supposed to start tomorrow. That's pretty exciting. We got Bobby Brink and Cam York in there. Let me ask you about the World Junior Championships first, actually. What do you think about Team USA specifically, since there are two Flyers who have kind of made that team? We can talk maybe about Emile Andre a little bit as well.
I mean, this is you have a lot of the players from that NTDP group, the National Team Development Program group, that was one of the best groups ever assembled. I mean, 18 other players were drafted, including York, and Brink also was tied to the program, even though he wasn't a full timer with them.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very, very good club. York is the only returning defenseman this year, so I think he's going to go from last season was disappointing because he barely played, and I was, I understand he was battling some injury issues at the time. I was really unhappy with how little he played in there. I know the Flyers were philosophical about it, but they would have liked to have seen him play more too. Brink did get at least some power play time, but fourth line duties. Other than that, those two guys are going to be central players on the team. I expect York to get a lot of power play time, get a lot of increased 5-on-5 time, and I think Brink will have an opportunity to show what he can do too. Both guys made really good use of their off seasons. I think everybody's seen the pictures of Cam York in the gym over the last year. He's had a lot of muscle to his frame. And Brink made good use of the time too. So I think that Team USA is going to be a really good, intriguing team on its own right to watch this year. But I also think that the two Flyers representatives on that team will be key players, and that'll be a great thing to watch. And then you also have on the Swedish team, Emile Andre, was just drafted this year. Now he's already playing in the SHL. He was the captain of the under-18 team for Sweden a year ago. So you knew he had a pretty good chance of making the national team for the World Juniors. Usually those guys are in at every age group, and if they're a captain at 17, 18, chances are they're going to be part of the World Juniors a little earlier than other guys. The WJC is known really as a 19-year-olds tournament, but there are exceptions. You can look at guys that played 2 or sometimes even 3 times in the tournament. So I think Andre will, he'll get his minutes this year. I look for him next year to have a central role. This year we'll see how he does, because he is playing against pros over in Sweden. So this is a good test for him against his own age group.
Yeah, and I've heard a lot of good things about him, and physically it'll be a good test for him overall, because that's his biggest knock, right? So why not see how he handles against bigger, stronger players, a little bit older than him. So it'd be interesting. Though, again, he's already dealing with that in the SHL, but, I guess just among his age group.
Sure.
The question I have for you about York specifically, about him not getting ice time when he initially came, do you think that has anything to do with the fact he's a little bit young for his age group? Because he's from what I understand, he's like 6 months younger than most players in his age group, 5 months younger, something like that. And physically, then maybe that's why he kind of gets held back a little bit. And maybe once he comes to the pros and after time, that'll become less of an issue.
Yeah. Well, like I said, he really worked out like a demon in the gym. He looks ripped now.
Mm-hmm.
He's put on a lot of good weight.
You can see on his face.
Yeah, for sure. And he's he's not tall, but he has a low center of gravity, good skater, good skill. I think a year ago, again, he was dealing with some injury issues. There were some more experienced guys at the blue line, and he kind of got, kind of lost in the shuffle a little bit. But I think that as he progresses to pros, and I think this will be his last collegiate season too. I think he'll be a pro next year. Now, whether that's in the NHL or a year in the American League, we'll have to see how that goes. But I think that once he does land in the NHL, like with most players, he'll be eased in a little bit his first year. I hate using the word shelter, because you can't really shelter too many guys in the NHL. No. Yes, he'll get a lot of offensive zone starts, and he won't be out against other teams' best lines. But he'll still be evaluated on how he plays on both sides of the puck. But I think by year 2 and certainly by year 3 in the NHL, he should be getting a lot of minutes. He'll fit in nicely. I don't know if he'll be on the top pair with Provorov, but he'll be a top 4 kind of guy. And there's a lot of dimensions to his game, not just the offensive side too. So, I think he has an opportunity over time to show why the Flyers passed on Cole Caulfield to take him.
Yeah, and I actually completely agree with that. And as you're talking, like the name Duncan Keith starts going in my head. I always look at these defensemen where they kind of, it's not that they're underwhelming, but they're not the flashiest defenseman. Like he has flash to his game, but when you look at him compared to Quinn Hughes, you don't necessarily think, oh, he's the same dynamic type of defenseman, right? But he's still an offensive defenseman. And I look at Cam York as a guy, if he can just fix a few minor things of his game, which seemed like a natural progression for a guy who's a little younger and obviously a defenseman and, adjusting to the game, it seems to me like he could be a guy who maybe even exceeds expectation. And like you said, prove the fact why the Flyers chose to skip on Cole Caulfield, because they had to make that decision for a reason. They're not, they're not stupid. They're not like, oh yeah, Cole Caulfield, he's 5'7", whatever. They didn't make the decision that way. They saw something special in York, and I don't know. That's kind of what I see. Do you see anything of that?
No, I totally agree. I think that you talk about character of a player too, right? Certain things jump out with him. A very, like we talk about his off puck play, very quick defensive stick. He thinks the game very well. That elite group he was playing with in the NT DP, he could play whatever pace the game was played at. Not a lot of guys can do that. One of my, and if we go into talking about prospects at some point, one of the things with Morgan Frost that he's going to have to adapt to get an NHL role is that even though Morgan is capable of he's a fast skater. He didn't win fastest skater at the top prospects with and without the puck because he can't skate. But Morgan does have a tendency to study the play, slow things down a little bit, slow down and then speed up. And that worked. That worked in the OHL. It worked with mixed success in the AHL. And after a couple of games in the NHL, where he kind of surprised teams his first few games with just a sheer skill level, that was one of the issues that he struggled with a little bit. York can already play at any pace, so that puts him ahead of the game, particularly for a young defenseman. There are some positional things he's going to have to work on. There's he's going to have to deal with an NHL forecheck, which he has never dealt with so far. All those things, with young defensemen, the first time that you turn a puck over, it ends up in the back of your net, particularly if it's a go-ahead goal or tying goal or one that puts you 2 goals down in the third period or whatever it is. You can't let that snowball. How does a guy bounce back from it? At the, with the junior levels, he does it just fine. We're gonna have to see if he does that at the pros too. But he seems to have the hockey sense, and he certainly has the work ethic too. So that's those are all things that work in his favor for the long term.
Yeah, he actually, I was a little, I don't want to say down on him, but I didn't know enough about York when he was drafted. And I was kind of like, oh, I thought we were getting Caulfield, right? Like, I'm like, okay, it's going to happen. But, as I looked into him and saw a little bit of it in a dev camp, just the way he carries himself, I'm like, this guy, he's 18 years old and he looks like the oldest player here. And when I see that type of stuff and then I hear that he's half a year behind, he very much intrigues me just overall. And I do see a high ceiling for him. And I believe that he probably will prove people wrong. So you mentioned him. If you see York, and he's a little bit, I believe he's a year younger, if I remember correctly, from Zamula, or maybe even a little bit more. But he's younger than Zamula. If you see both of those next season, I'm kind of guessing here a little bit. Maybe Zamula will play this year. But that time where York comes into the NHL, do you see them kind of being neck and neck for a spot as far as making the NHL? Or do you think that maybe Zamula will have the edge? Or do you think that York will have the edge? Personally, from what I've seen, I kind of assume that York would have the edge, but I could be wrong there, and that the AHL maybe could also play a larger role there.
Yeah, I mean, we'll have to see how. I mean, Zamula will have a year of pro under his belt. Hopefully, when the AHL gets going, we're hoping in February. I would think he would start the season in the taxi squad unless there are injuries, but get a year of experience under his belt, and then we'll see from there. One thing with Zamula is that I think at the NHL level, although he's been although he became a power play defenseman at the World Juniors last year with Russia and also in the Western League, I don't think he's necessarily going to be a power play guy in the NHL. I think he's going to be a good puck mover, good mobility, just a smart hockey player. So if there's an opportunity to play on the power play, that might be where York's entry is. And could both guys break in at the same time? Potentially. But the thing is the more rookie defenseman you're trying to break in, the more challenging it is too. So we'll see how all that goes. But I mean, as to where they slot in the depth chart, I think we could answer that question a year out from now. Just see how the rest of New York season goes and see how Zamulla's first year as a pro goes.
Yeah, and I can totally see them staggering. So that actually leads me to my next question. We have these taxi teams, right? There's 4 to 6 extra players. I mean, my initial assumption is you see Ustimenko kind of, or I'm sorry, not Ustimenko, maybe Alex Lyon is kind of that extra guy you carry around, and then a combination of 4 other players. My guess would be Friedman would be one of them, maybe Zamula. Maybe they'll go Lazinski, maybe they go Allison, maybe they go Sandin. I'm not sure exactly. How do you kind of see that core group, and how do you see them using them, not just in the beginning of the season, but as the season rolls on? Because there's going to be like a month there, right, where there's no AHL hockey. Right. So what do you think is going to happen with that group?
Well, I don't know if Morgan Frost is going to make the opening night roster. There have been several hints dropped about he's going to play some games this year, and when he gets the opportunity, it'll be up to him to make the most of it. Right. Now if he has a spectacular camp, blows everybody away, then fine. They seem intent on having Morgan play center. I personally would be open-minded to him shifting to a wing if that's his ticket to the end, at least to break into the NHL. I know why they want him as a center, because he does have a center skill set and a playmaking ability. Right. But so I would think that if he doesn't make the opening night roster, if he doesn't make that group of 23, Morgan absolutely is a lock for probably the top forward spot on the taxi squad. I don't know if Connor Bunnaman is going to make the roster or Swarinsky. Bunnaman got in a couple of playoff games last year. So could Bunnaman potentially be the 13th forward? That's possible. If not, then he's in that other group. Carson Swarinsky is kind of on the bubble. He was not taken. Swarinsky made the opening night roster, and I actually thought he had a decent camp in July, but he ended up not going to the bubble as a black ace. So I don't think, although Andreoff was taken to Toronto, of course he's a veteran at this point, I don't necessarily think Andreoff will make the taxi squad, but he was part of that playoff group. Zamula for sure. I think Friedman will make the NHL roster. I think they'll carry 8 defensemen, and I think Friedman will be the 8th. Zamula would start the year as the 9th, and of course with guys on their entry levels like Zamula, you can just move them up and down as you need to. It's the guys who are no longer in entry level deals you got to worry about getting through waivers. If they were to put Friedman on the taxi squad, he'd have to clear waivers first.
So that makes me think immediately that Sam Morin, which maybe even might be a risky move, but is he going to sit in that territory? Because I believe he has to pass through waivers unless they put him through maybe some kind of like training, like recovery session, right, for the AHL. But otherwise, wouldn't he have to pass through waivers?
He would. I would think that after all the time that Sam has missed, though, he
would pass through cleanly.
He would pass through, yeah.
Okay.
Because I don't think a team that would claim him would have to have a spot for him on their NHL roster, and he needs to play.
Right, that's true. 10 minutes.
I think Sam will get his minutes when the AHL starts. I don't know if he'll be. They're going to carry maybe 2. I think a couple defensemen on there. A guy who intrigues me because they definitely want him playing and they want him to have minutes, but he's not a candidate to play in the NHL right now. Is Isaac Ratcliffe. Right?
I was going to bring him up.
Yeah, I think that Isaac, if they carry a bigger taxi squad, he might make the numbers game in there. If they don't, if they carry like a smaller group or they carry 2 goalies. So let's say like in the bubble they had Lyon and they had Ustimenko. If you have 2 goalies, then you might see a guy like Ratcliffe squeezed out for a few weeks and figure, okay, well when the AHL season starts, so he'll get time there. At the end of last season, though, Scott Gordon was asked who he thought his most improved player from beginning to end of the season was, and he actually picked Ratcliffe. So I think they certainly want him playing, but he's not necessarily a candidate for the NHL roster, right? Lashinsky, I think, has a shot at making the NHL team. Allison, I think, because he's another guy who missed a lot of time with injuries. Now, he was healthy at the end of the season, and he looked finally back to the level he was at in his sophomore year before he tore his ACL. So I think that they'd like to see Allison play a little bit with the Phantoms, and then you might see him come up. And they didn't bring, they didn't sign Sandin really to be an AHL guy. They brought him in to see if he could compete for an NHL job. So he might be a guy in the mix too for the taxi squad. Really, that's going to be some of the most competitive battles you're going to have in camp, because the one level cutoff is the opening night roster, and the next level cutoff is who goes as the taxi squad guys. I didn't mention a guy like German Rubtsov, who I think is going to stay over in Russia, at least till the AHL starts. Same thing with David Kasha. And Maxim Sushko had a nice rookie year with the Phantoms last year, but he's currently playing in the KHL, and I think he's going to stay there too until the season.
Makes sense.
Yeah,
and that totally makes sense to me. And it's interesting you bring up German Rubtsov, because you forget about some of these names, and that's why I was going to bring up Ratcliffe, because I was going to ask you a little bit later, but I'd rather just talk about it now. I was going to ask you your surprises. Like, what do you think would be surprising kind of going into camp? We all think we all know everything. And in my opinion, I think a guy like Isaac Ratcliffe, based one off of what you said, the fact his size is immense, I was already expecting him to take longer than everybody else. So it didn't really surprise me. He was a little quieter than I expected for sure, but the Phantoms they didn't look very good. So I kind of account for that as well. So do you think a guy like Isaac, do you think he could surprise people and maybe not make the team, right? Because that's hard to even predict that, but at least be in that conversation to go from maybe one of the more forgotten guys where everybody's talking about Farabee and Frost to all of a sudden where everybody goes, wait. We have a guy who kind of lit it up in juniors as well, and he's also a mammoth. And if you can put it all together, he's extremely valuable at the NHL level.
Yeah, he was. They were developing him along different lines last season, because I think everybody came in expecting he was going to be a power play, power forward. I think one of the first hints I got was I asked Scott Gordon, actually, if you remember when Ratcliffe, not his junior season where they won the OHL championship, but the season before that, he actually got in two games with the Phantoms at the end of the season, after Guelph was out of the playoffs, and he played in the power play in both of those games. Scored his first AHL goal, I think, in his debut with the Phantoms, and it was a tip in right in front of the net. I asked him if he thought he was going to step in and be like a net front guy in the power play, and he said he actually felt that he has a lot of work until he'd be ready for that, and a lot of the details in his game. A lot of times, really big players, when pucks are at their feet or along the walls and stuff, they struggle. They struggle when they're young. They have to learn how to use their feet a lot better in a lot of cases. And he's certainly is a case of that. As the season went along last year, they told him, really don't worry about the offensive side of your game. They made him more of a checker and a penalty killer. And, in talking to Isaac at the end of the season, he thinks that might actually be his entry point into the NHL. And then maybe the offense comes along, as you get a little bit older, as it sometimes does with power forward types. So if he can continue along those lines as a big body that gets in the forecheck, wins battles on the walls, and can at least be a secondary penalty killer, then I think he's in the conversation. I don't think he's in the mix right now to step in and be a power play guy or play in your top 6 or even your top 9 on the Flyers. So that would be the sweet spot for him, I think, if he's going to get to the NHL, at least at the beginning. Would be a fourth line type.
Yeah, and you can see that in his body type, but I completely agree with you, but I do still see an offensive game to him. Like I'd be very, and I know you're not saying that, but I'd be very surprised if Ratcliffe doesn't end up being a guy who can produce 20 goals in the NHL. And I see him, he moves like a smaller player, but he got to get through some of that awkwardness, that size. But eventually, I think if they just give him some time, maybe in the AHL to be a scorer, I think it will translate. I think I'm pretty excited about him still. I just don't think, I think a lot, like even somebody like Morin, I think these bigger players, people make the assumption that because they're big, it's an advantage, but it depends on the player. It depends on their body type, right? And most young kids come in like a scrawny stick. That's why I asked you about Zamula, because when Zamula first came in, he was very poised. I love the way he moved the puck, but he's very scrawny, even for a tall guy. And how are you going to take the lower body hits? And that's the stuff that concerns me. So this is kind of like the next big topic. And I think this is kind of the larger conversation that's been going on this summer. And we don't really have that much to talk about overall because there aren't that many questions with this team. But there is one, and that was the surprise that came in. Matt Niskanen retires. The defense now is in a weird situation. I've heard your opinions before. But the defense, it's in a weird place. Let's be honest. Like, it was very solidified, and now it's like there's a bunch of talent there, but nothing is that clearly defined. We have Phil Myers, obviously, will probably get a look. Sanheim will get a look. Ghost, Gustafson. It just seems like they're going to try everything, maybe. But how do you see things playing out? And do you have an ideal state for how you would like to see the Flyers kind of go into the season on the defensive side specifically?
Right. Well, I think the starting place is what the Flyers lost Niskanen's retirement. Niskanen was no superstar, but what he was above average in everything.
Mm-hmm.
Ate a lot of minutes, played against other teams' top lines, killed penalties, played in the second power play unit, just had the right mindset to just put adversity behind him and just keep rolling.
Mm-hmm.
Every team needs players who bring elements that Niskanen brought. Now Justin Braun brings it to a lesser extent, but you really need a guy who plays a lot of minutes in a key role, who's a guy who does this. And I think I've said this before. If you've ever been on or around a hockey bench, it's a very emotional game. And there are times when things are in danger of falling apart. Guys are slamming sticks. Everybody's upset, right? Things are turning against your team, and you need a guy. And so Kimmo Timonen was excelled at. It's not even what you say, it's how you say it. And it's just, okay, guys, we're okay. Everybody take a deep breath. We're going to be okay here. Then you go out your next shift and you have a good shift and everything calms down. Right. I said Kimmo Timonen excelled at that. And the Flyers didn't really have that for a number of years. And Niskanen came in and he helped solidify things. If you look at how good the Flyers record was when they were leading after two periods last year, a lot of that had to do with, because a lot gets thrown on you in third periods. It's not just automatic you're going to win the game, even though statistically, chances favor you're going to win if you're leading after two. Niskanen brought a lot of that. Now, who's going to be that guy? Who's going to be that guy in the D-corps who brings that? I don't know who that guy is going to be. Provorov is going to have to become a little bit more vocal and evolve into that. I think if you look at that group again, you get it from some extent with Braun. In terms of making up for the minutes, well, the power play side of it will I guess fall to Gustafson. It's going to be interesting to see how much Ghost gets to play, just because I don't think they're a viable pairing together. They just have the same collection of strengths and weaknesses, even though they get things done a little bit differently. But they're both guys who require a lot of offensive zone starts, a lot of power play time, and they have to play with the right kind of partner and the right kind of two-way guy. First of all, who's smart enough to read off of them, but also can also play a two-way game and compensate sometimes when you need that. Gustafson had his best year playing alongside, you mentioned Duncan Keith. His career year in Chicago came with Keith as his partner, and obviously that was no coincidence at all. So what is it going to take for the Flyers defense to not only account for the departure of Niskanen, but also to take the next steps in general? I think it falls on two guys, Phil Myers and Travis Sanheim. And both of those guys have played at a high level at times. We've also had some inconsistencies in their game. We saw that on the postseason. That pair was absolutely dominant together in the round robin, and even for segments of that Montreal series when the Flyers were posting shutouts in several games. Those two guys really stepped up in those games. In crunch time. Then the Islander series, it was the opposite. The wheels kind of fell off on that pairing. Maybe Travis a little bit more than Phil, but both of them had their moments. At least Travis was still getting up ice and trying to push the attack a little bit. Phil, although he actually scored an overtime goal, and he had a couple of really nice offensive forays in the playoffs that ended up in the net. If you just look at the number of shots he attempted and those kind of things, he got a little conservative, I thought, in the Islander series, in part because they were turning some pucks over and whatnot. Now one of those guys is going to have to probably be the guy who moves up to the top pairing with Provorov. Myers probably gets the first crack at it. so you can keep the left-right pairing together. Myers plays the right side, although Sanheim can play either side. If you remember Sanheim this past season, the season before, when Scott Gordon was coach, he played with Provorov the second half of that season. Rick Wilson and Scott Gordo gave him that chance to play in the top pairing. And, we had some ups and downs, but I think more good than bad. But I think that, I think when you're trying to think of a contending team's blue line, because you no longer have that safety valve of Niskin on the top pairing, where you could have Sanheim and Myers as your second pair, you're going to have two new pairings there. I think probably both guys, to varying degrees, are going to have to step up this season. If they can do that, then I think the team will be just fine, because I like the forward group and I like the and of course the goaltending. Well, I love Carter Hart, who doesn't, right? But it's that to me is my question on the blue line. And then the forwards, and I guess we'll get into it, is how much does Nolan Patrick bounce back this year? Is he healthy and whatnot? That's the key to the forward group for me.
Well, we'll get into the forward. So that's actually was my next follow-up. So Nolan Patrick is back. He's skating, right? We're getting answers. We don't get final answers. I mean, my thing is always to stay positive, and I've seen players miss. I mean, Simone Gagne was my favorite player growing up. I watched him miss an entire season for a complete unknown. They had no idea why those head injuries were happening. I remember I worried he'd never play again. Again, I was a kid. So for me, that was like, oh my God. It's like these things happen, and it's best to stay patient. But I do get the sense that there is positivity here. You bring up the questions with Frost, right? There are so many questions at center, and I could also wash this idea away with the economic issues and the COVID issues, but they didn't go out and shore up the center spot, right? They let Thompson walk, they let Grant walk, right? And they didn't add anybody else. So that tells me that there is some confidence that he's probably playing, at least to a degree, that they're not extremely concerned, at least to the point that if they really need somebody, maybe they just go out and make a trade and bring in, or maybe an Eric Holla is still out there, somebody out there for maybe a PTO or available on a 1-year deal for maybe 1.5 million or something. What do you think?
Yeah, I think they're going to probably go into the season what they have. I actually blogged about Holla as an off-season possibility if they could have opened up a little bit, just a little more cap space. If you get him for $1 million or whatever, but he'll have other offers out there. Holla would have been a guy that I would have had a lot of interest in. Again, if Patrick is good to go, if not for opening night, but relatively early in the season, I mean, every time you just hope he holds up too, not just at the start of the season. If you can get him through the season pretty much unscathed, I think everybody can exhale, and then he's back on track. But I know with a lot of times with players coming back from long absences, you remember when Sidney Crosby missed all that time, and then every time he would take a check on the wall, everybody would just hold their breath, and then he showed he could stand up to it, and he was okay. After all the concussion issues, he came back. Now with Nolan, it's a little different. These are migraine issues, and they think it's a genetic thing. He's also had concussion issues too, and they're not sure how much those two might be interrelated. I mean, there's, it's very hard to pinpoint that stuff. Given that he, never really came all that close to playing last season. I mean, I think there's reason for skepticism and reason for concern, just in terms of how much is he going to hold up. But I agree with you that the Flyers didn't have some degree of confidence in his availability this season. I think they might have prioritized things a little bit differently this summer. They might have, for example, in terms of the trade rumors with Shane Gostisbehere, they weren't simply just going to give him away. They get some cap relief on him and whatever, but they weren't just going to, whatever you give us, we'll eat half the salary, blah, 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 blah. They weren't doing that. So, they have to have some degree of confidence anyway that and if not him, then maybe Scott Lawton plays third line center, or maybe Frost impresses and he's ready to go there, and they fill in around it. But I think the number one solution is Nolan Patrick, and if you have a healthy Nolan Patrick, then all of a sudden this is a really deep, really talented forward core.
Yeah. And we are on the last question here. So we're in the last 5 minutes. So that's what I want to finish with. I want to finish with how do you see this offense panning out? How do you see a Claude Giroux? Because we talk about young players so often, right? And I was kind of realizing today, I'm like, we're not even like talking about Claude Giroux, but he really is potentially the biggest element to this team actually winning a Stanley Cup in a lot of ways. I mean, he is the heart and soul of the team in a lot of ways. He carries the C. Everybody clearly follows him. I've never heard a single Flyer personally. I don't have any insight, but I've never heard them say anything bad about him. He clearly very much cares. He's clearly very talented, and I don't care what other people say. To me, he's an elite. You can call him a franchise player, but he is a face of a franchise kind of guy. He's been very consistent. How do you see Giroux? And let's just say this top line, and we can assume it's the top line we saw. Giroux, Couturier, Voracek, and the rest of that squad. How do you see them kind of shoring up against the rest of the teams in the Metro? And can Giroux still lead the way that he used to?
Well, it's funny. After the 16-17 season, rather, Drew's largely written off by people. That's when he had that year with 101 points. And, he got, to me, he should have won the Hart Trophy, but at the very least been a finalist. That was an absolute joke that he didn't finish in the top three. But
thank you. Completely agree. Never saw it before ever in history. It's the only time I've ever seen that.
Yeah. So I thought that, this past year wasn't a bad year for him necessarily. The playoffs weren't what he wanted them to be. Mm-hmm. But, he was actually on his hottest streak of the season when the pandemic hit. I think he had something like 18 or 19 points over the last 16 games, and the Flyers were winning and winning and winning and winning. And that's not totally coincidental either. So I don't think he's done as an offensive impact player. Now, should the Flyers go in expecting him to, contend for the Art Ross Trophy at this point in his career? Probably not. But I still think that the combination of the things that he brings, he still is a great setup guy in the power play. He needs some other weapons around him producing. I think Giroux is not done as a productive player. Couturier, what you have in Couturier, right? You have a Selke Trophy winner and another, once again, a candidate to win it again going into the season. Mm-hmm. His goal production was actually a little bit down this last year, but his overall play was outstanding, and he's still in the prime of his career, and he should be for a few more years to come. So you're pretty well set with him. And Voracek, I actually thought that Voracek had, at least during the regular season, one of his better two-way seasons in the NHL. I really thought that, and I don't know how much of it was kicking and screaming, but AV demanded that everybody back check and they play a two-way game. And I really thought that Jake had a good season last year. It's not only about points. Now, in the postseason, he was really good in the Montreal series, had kind of a tough series against the Islanders as much as the Flyers attack did. It's funny that series got 7 games, because it's a lot of the team had some rough going against the Islanders, yet they get to a game 7. But so I mean that's a good group. Now, could you see Konechny play on that line? Maybe. Could you maybe see Giroux play with Kevin Hayes? And if you remember last year, what was the Flyers' best line for the first 6 weeks of the season? It was Lindblom, Couturier, and Konechny. Yep. And Konechny, of course, a large part of his hot start was playing with those other two guys who were, obviously outstanding two-way players. Lindblom was scoring goals. He was, everything was clicking with that line. It was the other lines that were in flux, and they weren't really sure what they had. And the only reason that line was broken up was to try to spread the wealth a little bit. So could you see Lindblom go back with Couturier and Konechny? I don't see any reason why not. It's just that, as long as Hayes keeps producing like he did last year, because Hayes had a slow start and then he played really well the rest of the season. So I really like the top 6 group. A guy like Joel Farabee could slide up in there potentially. Yep. In the postseason, you saw Lawton, who can play left wing or play center. He moved up to the second line, and he was the Flyers' hottest scorer early in the postseason. So, they have different options, and I like the forward group. I like the depth. Do you have your 40 goal scorer, no, but you have enough depth that we haven't even mentioned James Van Riemsdyk yet,
Right.
and JVR can still get you, prorated in a shorter season, but JVR can still get you a prorated 25 goals or so, and that's a guy. That's a guy we just mentioned the top 6 in the lineup, and we didn't mention his name. So they have weapons on there, and the Flyers at least in the regular season last year were in the upper echelon offensively. The power play was what really killed them in the postseason. You need your power play producing a little bit, and it was ran really hot and cold in the regular season, although the overall numbers were decent. But that's obviously one of the big things, getting the power play being a little bit more consistent and figuring out who your third line center is. Other than that, I really like the forwards.
Yeah, maybe that's what Gustafson's for. And it's interesting that you said, you were talking about mixing up the lines. I talk about that all the time, and especially that line you were referring to with Couturier. My dream, and this is optimistic because Patrick's current situation, but I always kind of saw Nolan Patrick hopefully playing with Claude Giroux, because I think that would be a really nice combination. Even if it's like Giroux, Patrick, and Voracek as the second line behind Lindblom, Couturier, and Konechny. You can do an amazing 1-2 punch there. And with the progress Konechny and Lindblom made, if things went well with Patrick, I was kind of hoping that would be, fill in that top 6 perfectly, let Kevin Hayes be a dominant third line center, and then you can really attack every single line. You can use Kevin Hayes as a shutdown defenseman, take the weight off of Couturier. So these are all things I think are important. So I'm totally with you on that. All right. We're at the end of the show here, Bill. I want to say thank you so much for joining. I want to say thank you to our sponsor, also Jim's Steaks on South. Cheesesteaks are awesome there. Definitely grab your cheesesteaks. Don't hesitate because they're a Flyers fan and they picked us on purpose because we're a Flyers company. So check out Jim's Steaks. And Bill, really, this was so awesome, and thank you so much. And obviously, if you guys don't know where to follow him, Bill, do you have anything you want to tell people about? I guess like any shout out to any work real quick that's coming out? Yeah,
we actually have upcoming on the Flyers official website, PhiladelphiaFlyers.com. We're going to do a little kind of a takeaways from Alain Vigneault's press conference today, talking about the return to play plan. One thing I'm really looking forward to running later this week is 17 players on the Flyers training camp roster have had previous World Junior Championship experience. It's about what a stepping stone that the World Juniors really are to the NHL. Mm-hmm. So I looked at each and every guy on the team and what was their World Junior experience like. So awesome. That's something that should run probably, I think, on Saturday, as I understand. So that's something that I think people will like. And the other thing I want to give a shout out to is the Flyers Alumni Association. They're doing, for the second straight year, 12 days of Christmas giving, and each and every day, different alumni, really living all over North America, suggest a charity in their community, and the alumni are making a donation, or some years will donate time, volunteer time. But this year, because of COVID, it's primarily checks. But they're doing some amazing things, particularly in terms of there's a lot of people with food uncertainty this year. So that was a big focus. Food pantries in Bucks County, which was Kerry Huffman's suggestion. There was one in Rochester, Minnesota, which is Sean Podine's suggestion. The alumni at Brad Marsh's initiative gave to Phil Abundance this year. So it's that was a big focus this year. But it was really alumni from all over North America, from different generations of the team. Gary Peters, who played in the original team, suggested a charity in Saskatchewan. So it's really Flyers alumni from all over the U.S. and Canada, doing a lot of good things for different communities during the holiday season, and just a great group of guys. So I wanted to mention that. That's awesome. That is great to hear, and I love hearing that guys are still sticking together, years later after the team, just, the whole family thing. Flyers thing, it's amazing. All right. Well, thank you, Bill. Really appreciate you coming on. Thank you to everybody. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed this. We'll have more every week. Remember to always stay gritty.